Hi there. Welcome back to the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in today's very special episode, we're going to be talking about a little film called The Banshees of Inisherin.
Very excited for this one. Everything was fine yesterday. Two lifelong friends find themselves at an impasse when one abruptly ends their relationship, with alarming consequences for both of them. The Banshees of Inisherin came out, late 2022. It's directed by Martin McDonagh, who has done a handful of films. Most recently, I think, is at 3 Billboards.
Yeah, 4 feature-length films, I believe, and then
4
one
of them?
short, I think.
So we got 3 Billboards, In Bruges, and 7 Psychopaths.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've seen all of these. In Bruges, I feel like that's like an internet cult film. A lot of people talk about that. I missed it when it came out. I didn't watch it until maybe the past couple of years. And it's solid. And 3 Billboards, I think, won a whole bunch of Oscars and awards. Like, it's a really good film. Did we watch 7 Psychopaths?
I watched 7 Psychopaths. Actually, I was going to say, yeah, Martin McDonagh has been one of those people who I've been watching his films, and he's one of those directors that just keeps getting better and better. And I was going to say, like, 7 Psychopaths. I'm going to say right now, I'm stating it here and now. 7 Psychopaths is it's going to be one of my comfort films. If I'm feeling down or depressed, I will throw on 7 Psychopaths and everything will feel right in the world again. It's up there for me. Like, I know, like Jaws and The Abyss, 7 Psychopaths is another one that these might be weird comfort films for some people, because maybe they're not, maybe the subject matter is not particularly comforting, but there's just something about the way 7 Psychopaths is made, the way the characters interact, the dialogue, the filmmaking. I feel like I'm nestled in like a nice warm blanket. I'm transported somewhere to this weird, crazy world that McDonagh's created for, the 2 hours plus. Yeah, but every one of his movies so far for me has been just great, incredibly rewatchable, and I think The Banshees of Inisherin is no different.
Oh, yeah. Starring Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, who have worked with McDonagh in the past, obviously in Bruges. And I think Colin has worked with him on 7 Psychopaths as well.
He was the main character in 7 Psychopaths, yeah. Him and Sam Rockwell.
Yeah. And if IMDb trivia can be trusted, which it probably can't, but it says like both of them basically signed on for Banshees like 5, 6, 7 years before it came out, which is, a testament to how much I think they really respect the director. Martin also wrote all these movies too, I believe. At least Banshees, he wrote and directed.
Yeah, he's also, I was doing some reading after watching Banshees. He's also a playwright. I think he may have started out as a playwright, but I think Banshees of Inisherin was part of almost like a trilogy of Inish movies. There was a couple of, or not Inish movies, but Inish pieces. There's a couple other, I think 2 other plays, which I think Carrie Condon, who's in this movie, she starred in one of those, the stage, not stage adaptation. It's literally a play that he had written. And when I'd read that about him, something made a lot more sense in terms of like how his movies are structured and how like the dialogue is structured. They feel like, not in a bad way. It feels in a very positive way, but they feel like movies that a playwright would have written, right?
Yeah.
It kind of makes a certain kind of sense in how they're structured. This guy is prolific at director writer combo, and I like that he seems to be really taking his time. He's only got 4 feature films to his name. In Bruges came out at least 10 years ago, if not more than that by now, right? 10, 12 years ago?
Yeah, I don't recall.
More than that, but like in that space of time, he's directed, I think he wrote and directed all 4 of those movies, right? In Bruges, 7 Psychopaths, 3 Billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri, and The Banshees of Inisherin.
Yeah, so In Bruges came out in 2008.
2008.
7 Psychopaths in 2012, and 3 Billboards in 2017. So yeah, he's definitely.
Yeah, but I like. He seems to be one of those directors who is all about the quality versus more than the quantity, which is great. It's refreshing in this day and age, I should say.
These are fine films, and Banshees of Inisherin is a banger. Like, this movie, like, I'm not going to hold back. This was a really good film. Watching this for the first time, I managed to get to see it in theaters. I didn't really know what I was getting into because you try and stay away from a lot of trailers and a lot of hype. Watching this in theaters and be like, oh my goodness, this is something else. This is a dark comedy with some pretty interesting themes around, friendship and mental illness. It was just presented in such a compelling way. The actors, like Colin Farrell, really, he does such a bang up job in this movie. He's fantastic. Brendan Gleeson, always fantastic. And the supporting cast here, Kerry Condon and Barry Cogan as well.
Oh, Barry Cogan, yeah, that kid is.
This guy is on
He's
fire.
going places.
Yep. Yeah, he could do no wrong at this point. And yeah, I mean, basically, where does this movie even start? I mean, it's essentially, it is Brendan Gleeson's character, Colm, just saying, you know what, I'm done with this friendship with Colin Farrell, who's Podrick. Padrick or Podrick?
Pedrick?
Padrick?
Pedrick? You gotta say it with an Irish accent. You gotta go like Pedrick?
Well, this is the thing. What I was looking it up, I'm looking up all the names, and like Colin Farrell's sister in this movie, Kerry Condon, her name is Siobhan, is how it's pronounced in the movie.
Yeah.
But when I'm looking at it on like IMDb, it's just like the spelling
it's
is
written like Siobhan, right? But it's yeah.
And there's I mean, I'm not familiar enough with my Irish to do any of the names justice throughout this.
Yeah, we apologize to Ireland, the people of Ireland. We are going to butcher at least some of these names as we're going through. It's not intentionally, just because we're dealing with our Canadian, the limits of our Canadian accents. Only go so far here.
Yeah. So it's Colm just saying, you know what, I'm done with this friendship, and he just tells Patrick to just get out, like just stop talking to me, and that's just it. And it plays out in funny ways and disturbing ways. Like, it gets escalated fairly quickly. It's really neat. I mean, what were your first thoughts when you watched this movie for the first time?
Yeah, so despite being a fan of Martin McDonagh from the get-go here, the overall plot description or the description of the movie that I had read didn't seem all that interesting or engaging. Yeah. I did enter the movie with a little bit of trepidation, even though I was a huge fan of his already. I needn't have been worried. I think part of the problem was trying to capture the intricacies of this movie in one of those internet plot descriptions, like one sentence lines, is incredibly hard because it is so thematically rich, and this is it's a character driven piece. It's about relationships between not just the two main characters, Colm and Pedrick, but between everybody living on that island of Inisherin. I was absolutely, like you, I'm going to leave no holds barred. You know what I think of your movie, Mr. McDonagh? It was great and I loved it.
So aggressive.
The hard hits coming here.
Don't hold back on us here now, Nathan.
I want to see more movies like this.
So, I mean, really the big theme I walk away from with this movie is like that male friendship. And that's, I mean, something I think we can relate to directly here is kind of that classic trope of a lot of male friendships, they're not talking to each other, right? There's no communication going on. It's like, do we really know each other and the struggles we have? Like, in this one, Colm is definitely dealing with something. I mean, something snapped in him where he's just like, I have to make a big change in my life. And he just doesn't really communicate it very well with Patrick. And Patrick doesn't really understand. Like, he's never understood. Like, they say they're lifelong friends, but they just don't have that connection of like their deeper selves, right? Like, is that a big theme you got it out of the movie? Like,
partially, I think. For me, what works so amazingly well about this movie was that it was so richly layered in terms of its themes, right? So you're looking at obviously there's a surface level, the plot of one day this friend just wakes up and decides like, hey, we're not friends anymore. And the fallout from that and trying to reconcile, potentially decades of that relationship and kind of square that away with like trying to figure out, get to the reason why. And it's a compelling character drama in and of itself in that case, but also it's dealing with some really deeper themes here as well. The movie is set during the Irish Civil War, which I believe, I had to look this up. I didn't know off the top of my head. It was between, I think, 1922 and 1924.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range. So it was 1920s, early 1920s. And I think it was pretty clearly meant, like the relationship of these two men was pretty clearly meant to be an allegory for specifically the Irish Civil War, but then deeper than that, war in general, in terms of the senselessness of how these things start, right? And turning, like so many wars, especially civil wars, where you're turning essentially brother against brother, sister against sister, people you've known your whole life, and you come to this point where one or other party, there seems to be at an impasse. But if you look back at the wars throughout human history, and so many of them, every one of them has been started for some ridiculous reason, some reasons that were forgotten or that were nonsensical. But I think there was something like the absurdity of war and the absurdity of how these wars begin, and the triviality and the banality of how these conflicts start. Or if you look at Colin, what he was saying was, he was trying to explain why he ended the friendship. And he was saying, essentially, like, I can't waste my time just sitting here literally shooting the shit, because they were he was saying one time about how Pedro was like talking to him for like 3 hours or something about his donkey's dung.
Yeah.
And he makes some comments like, well that shows you how much you were paying attention. I was actually talking about my my pony's dung.
Yeah.
But he talks about he brings up specifically Mozart, because he's a musician as well. He plays the fiddle. And he's like, I need to do something with my life. I need to leave behind this legacy, and I can't focus on doing that if I'm distracted by you. And it seems like, we will get into that later, but like, it's such a banal, such a trivial thing to end a lifelong relationship and to turn other people's worlds upside down, because this has an effect on other people around them as well. But really, their whole relationship is really, going at a high level, man's inhumanity to man, but really a not so subtle critique. This is probably one of the finest anti-war movies, I don't know if ever made, but for sure in the last 20 years, where it's just talking about like how absurd and ridiculous these conflicts between people are, either on an individual level or on the level of nations. And I think his sister Siobhan, Carrie Conlon, at one point is talking to Colm, and he says something like, "Oh, your brother's being ridiculous," and she's like, all men are ridiculous to me. Like, you're all being ridiculous. You're all being crazy." And I think that, for me, that exchange was really kind of the crux of the movie, where, yeah, of course, if you look at the human history, and you look at human history and the history of wars and the reasons why they're started, it's maddeningly ridiculous, the reasons that we will, kill our brothers for a piece of land, or because somebody's pride was hurt or something. So I think that was one of the prevailing themes in the movie, and it hit really hard. It wasn't immediately apparent to me. It was about halfway through the film I realized they kept bringing up the war, which was the Irish Civil War, because they were off the mainland, not off because Ireland is an island, but they were an island off the island.
Well, I mean, without a doubt, you have essentially this entire island community who is so detached from the war. Like, the war doesn't exist on their island, but literally a few hundred feet away over the water, they hear the gunshots, they hear the cannon fire, and they kind of forget that the war is going on because they'll be walking along their path, they'll hear cannon fire, look over, see an explosion, it takes them by surprise all the time. And they even say in the movies, like, we don't really know like why they're fighting or anything. The cop has to go over to do some executions, to help with executions. Then Colm asks him, like, well, what side is doing what execution? He's just like, oh, honestly, I don't know. I'm just like, it's a little job that he's excited to do, which is like, I feel like kind of shows that the community, all the people in it are kind of boring and don't have a lot going on. So when they have an opportunity to do something like that, they just don't care. But at the greater allegory for the war is that they're really not invested in it and they don't know why things are happening. And apparently, like, I didn't really read too much about the actual Irish Civil War there, but they said it was very complicated. It like they learned it in school, and it's like kids are walking away still confused over why this thing really went down. There's a lot of intricacies in it. And even here, everyone has an interest in these two friends not being friends anymore. And nobody really understands why exactly, because it's kind of ambiguous and vague, the reasons Colm gives. But as the movie progresses, people just want to stay out of it. As soon as the two of them are like in the same room, they just sort of start looking in different directions. They have no interest in what's going on between these two guys anymore. It's like that indifference that's like inherent in this community.
It was such a great commentary and so subtle, again, on the senselessness of these wars. Like, people are like, oh, well, why is this war going on over there? Nobody knows, right? And obviously, like, they're trying to get to the heart of, like, well, why did Colm, break up with Pedrick? And, like, nobody really knows. And there's these really obscure, and even Colm himself sometimes is having trouble really articulating the why of it. And it's like, it speaks again to that, just the senselessness of wars. Like, why are we sending tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people to die over reasons that people either were muddy to begin with or don't even remember the cause of, right? It's in the whole absurdity of the relationship breaking up and the absurdity of everything going on in Inisherin is a perfect microcosm for the absurdities of war, down to the actual, you see, like, there's allegories for, like, civilian casualties as well, right? Our unintended casualties. Like, obviously, Pedrick's donkey, Jenny, chokes on one of, we'll get to this later, chokes on one of Colm's fingers.
Tragic. Yeah.
But there was also people, like, when Colm, he invites other musicians from, I think it's a university or something, to come in, and they're kind of jamming together, and he's kind of passing on. He's trying to teach what he's learned over his years. And the one guy Pedrick picks up on the wagon as he's leaving the pub, and he tells him the story about how there was a message that his father got hit by a bread wagon, and he's trying to essentially break up that relationship. But you see, like, oh, it's almost like these are, even if they're not dying, it's an allegory for, like, unintended, like, casualties of war. Like, oh, you're going after this target that's ancillary to your actual main target, right? And drawing people into the conflict, right?
Yeah, like, Pedrick can't talk to Colm directly because he's going to cut off more fingers. So he has to attack his friends instead, like, after these high value targets, and he sees Colm in the pub, like, they're all having a blast. All the musicians, everyone's invested in the music and hanging out. He's just like, well, I'm going to do this. And it's a huge turn of character for Pedrick as well, to start being mean to people. And I think that's, for me, like, seeing his turn from the beginning of the movie to, like, kind of the nice guy of the island. He knows everybody. He's very involved. Like, he's very content. Personal, exactly. Thank you. And seeing him degress into a mean person to ultimately, like, completely break apart by the end was also really tragic. I mean, there's all sorts of tragedies in here, not least of which is Jenny the donkey, who, you mentioned before, she perishes on one of his fingers. It's just like a really totally senseless.
Yeah. I don't know if we explained before, like, when Colm ends the relationship with Pedrick just, like, can't grasp it in his head, and he keeps talking to him. So Colm threatens him. He says, every time you talk to me from now on, you just won't listen to reason, but every time you talk to me from now on, I'm going to cut off one of my fingers. And then he's talking to his sister later on, and he's like, "You think he's really serious?" It's like, yeah, he's serious. Just leave him alone. But he tries again anyway. To goes talks to him.
Well, that's the crazy thing is that how could you be serious about cutting off your own fingers if you talk to a person, right? Like it's completely absurd.
Yeah, and like that's the thing that got me too. Like in a movie, in a world where I've seen movies like the Saw movies and Cannibal Holocaust and all these movies with crazy gore and violence.
Yeah.
To the point where like you start to get a little bit desensitized to the movie violence. And then to have something like, oh, I'm going to cut off my fingers if you talk to me, and like, okay. But then when he actually does it, and it still has this emotional gut punch in a way that I thought I was desensitized to this movie violence, but like, this is really, really impactful and really, really like it's very
impactful because it's really directly commenting on mental health and illness. Like this is the self-mutilation happening and to what seems like fairly reasonable people. And from Patrick's perspective, it's like, this is his friend. He's known forever. He knows who this guy is. There's no way he's serious about doing this, but Colm is so afflicted that he would actually proceed with doing this. And you think, I mean, he sums it up. He's just like, oh, I think he might just be a little bit depressed, right? It's just like he's fairly dismissive of it. And it seems reasonable that Patrick would continue to be like, well, like what? Like this can't be serious, but he's serious. And when the first finger arrives, you know he's not joking around, and he struggles so hard not to talk to him anymore. But obviously, the movie keeps going down that path.
It's interesting because I was looking at it more. It's obvious. Like watching it, it's like, yeah, they're dealing with like mental health issues here. It wasn't one of the main lenses I was watching the movie with, but it's interesting how that level stood out to you more. Mm-hmm. And like to me, it was like more of the war allegory. But like literally, there was a direct reference, like Colm cutting off his fingers. There's a saying, obviously, like cutting off your nose to spite your face, which means doing something that you think is going to hurt someone else without realizing or caring that it's going to hurt you as well. And it was like this literal manifestation of like cutting off my fingers to spite my hand in this case.
And in this situation, music is his passion, and why he stops being friends with this guy ultimately is so he can write and focus on his violin playing. When he removes a single finger, he's hobbled from this, right? He can't play it as well. And then he removes all of his fingers and he can't play the violin at all anymore. So it's like, he's directly like affecting. Now, granted, this is after he writes, his quote unquote masterpiece piece of violin music, the Banshees of Inisherin. And it's like with that, maybe he feels like kind of completed. He's completed that one part. This is a piece of music that's going to last forever in his mind.
Maybe. I think this ties into one of the other main themes that I wanted to talk about as well. This idea of legacy, because Colm is constantly talking about legacy in his reasoning for breaking up with Patrick. One of the things he does, there's that confrontation in the bar where Patrick gets drunk that one night, and he goes up and confronts him again. And he talks about, he's like, oh man, I've been nice, and Colm says, nobody remembers nice people. I was like, and he goes like, well, I remember my mother and my father, they were really nice. Like, I remember, like, my sister is really nice. I'm going to remember her. And he's like, nobody's going to remember them in like 50 or 100 years, but they remember people. He specifically brings up Mozart, right? Which is, again, pretty egotistical to be comparing yourself to Mozart. When you think about it, he was making like an argument that I think like a lot of us probably think about, especially as we get older. We think about our legacy, what we're going to leave behind, and what people are going to think about us. Are people going to remember us in 1,000 years when they, we have this podcast? It's probably part of that kind of anxiety related to death. But I think there's something a little bit deeper and darker about Colm's threatening to kind of cut off his fingers. Essentially, he's got that anxiety of leaving behind that legacy, but he's blaming what he perceives as a lack of a legacy. He's blaming it on Patrick, right?
Yeah.
He's essentially finding an excuse. It's like, oh, if you talk to me, I'm going to cut off my fingers. And then if he cuts off his fingers, he won't be able to play anymore. And if he can't play anymore, then the pressure of trying to create that legacy is gone, right? So in a weird kind of twisted, manipulative way, he's essentially, he sees there's a responsibility on himself, self-imposed responsibility perhaps, of creating this legacy, in his case, a musical legacy. He writes that one song, but presumably you want to write like a whole oeuvre, a whole like library, like Mozart, like he brings up.
Yeah.
But by creating this impossible to follow scenario, and he knows deep down that Pedrick is not going to be able to not talk to him because they were best friends.
Yeah.
For all those years. So he's essentially manipulating his friend into a way to take that sense of responsibility for creating a legacy off of himself. It's kind of a really roundabout, very manipulative way to essentially let yourself off the hook in that sense, even though it's a hook that you put yourself on. But I think there was that whole conversation about, you know, who's going to remember nice people. You know, we tend to think about legacy as like, oh, these big, important, I built this structure, or I wrote this book, or I conducted this symphony. But I think it was making a very human point about the legacy that matters is about being kind to people, like Haley Joel Osment, paying it forward. You know, those are the things that actually matter, not having your name written up there with Mozart, right?
Yeah.
I think that's both, it's an arrogant approach to legacy, but it's also an unhealthy approach to legacy, right? We shouldn't be trying to do things to get your name remembered. You should be trying to do things to improve people's lives.
Yeah.
And in that way, even if your name, most of us, our names are not going to be remembered in 100 years, but that legacy of kindness does pay forward, right?
That's right.
It does ripple forward. And if people were more like Pedrick in the beginning, then, you know, we wouldn't have war. They wouldn't have conflict there on Inisherin, but we wouldn't have wars in general, right? It was a tie back into that kind of, you know, human conflict motif as well.
Yeah, I really liked your point of like he's putting it on Pedrick, like he's essentially blaming other people for effectively his own like shortcomings, because he's obviously an accomplished violin player, like he has the skills. He could have been doing this for many, many years. And quite frankly, I mean, the movie makes a very specific point of saying they meet up every day at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. What they do before then is essentially they're on their own. It's like, you can't tell me that Colm wouldn't have enough time in his day to spend a bit of like an hour or two working on his music before or even after that, because they're not going to be at the pub all night every single day. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, and also the pure ego and the arrogance where he's calling out Mozart, and he references like the 18th century at the end of the conversation. Siobhan is just like, actually, it was the 17th century he was around in. So it's like this guy is just kind of so deluded, but he's so focused, like he has blinders on this one thing of just like he has to do this one piece of music, and that would kind of be fine. Like if he had the sort of the common sense to be like, listen, for the next week or two, I'm going to be focused 100% on this music.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me. Don't do this. Don't do that. Take himself out of that, because like I've seen that in life before as well. Like you just want to focus on one thing. You know, you're going to be
exactly
busy here and there, and people will understand that.
Wait,
but he does.
Are you
right?
breaking up with me?
Listen, we're not going to be able to record for the next couple of weeks. I really got to focus my Sundays on something here. I got to write the next big thing here.
You got to learn how to play the fiddle and then write your opus. It shouldn't take more than a couple of weeks.
Oh my goodness. But I also see the other side of it is that you do spend time pleasing others, right? And sometimes you put others in front of yourself. I think it's a very easy thing to do, where it's just like, oh man, tonight I'm going to work on, I mean, we try and write, we try and do some creative like outlets. And instead of writing, or say this podcast specifically, it's like, I'm going to edit this podcast. I'm going to spend 2 hours doing this. Then again, offer to go out for dinner with a friend. Well, I'm going to go out for dinner with that friend because I want to make them happy and I want to be social and stuff instead of focusing on my own thing. And then all of a sudden, 3 weeks have passed since I've worked on the podcast or my own creative outlets.
Oh yeah, there's always an excuse, right? And I think I don't want to make it sound like Colin is like the villain of the story. I think
No.
it's more complex than that, because I think some of the things he's saying too, even though he's comparing himself to Mozart, or like putting himself like, oh, I want to achieve that level of greatness. I think there's something to be said for, you do sometimes need time alone, or you do need sometimes time to, work on whatever your own project is. And I think that his motivations, to me personally, they were relatable, right? Especially as I get older and I have kids, and I think about, I spend time thinking about like, what are the things that my kids, or maybe eventually my grandkids, what are they going to remember about me? What am I going to leave behind for them? What's that legacy going to be? Even if it is not even, I think it would be perfectly fine, or even amazing, if all of our legacies were legacies of niceness, like Pedrick was arguing. I think there's a really heartbreaking scene where Dominic, who was played by, was it Barry Corgan? What is it, Corgan or Kogan?
I'm saying Kogan. I don't see an R in his name, but
Barry Kogan. Yeah.
Keoke.
Yeah. I'm going to say Kogan, even though that's probably incorrect as well. There's no R. Dominic, played by Barry Kogan. He's a younger gentleman. Got some great comedic lines that the staff with the hook on it. Like, what do you suppose this is for? Like, you think it's for hooking things the length of the stick away? It's like McDonagh's. It's mixed in with all these other like really heavy themes. Above all, this is a dark comedy. And Martin McDonagh excels at the dark comedy. Why do I keep putting the in front of everything? Am I getting older? Is like, I'm gonna start talking about the Facebook soon. It's like or the Twitter, the TikTok. But they're hanging out, and Pedrick's always super nice to him. He lets him stay over at his house after his father beat him there with a kettle, which he wouldn't have minded so much except for the spout.
It's so brutal.
And apparently, super dark, but apparently his father was also sexually abusing him, which comes out, they make reference to it as like he was fiddling with him, but it's like this got really super dark really fast.
Oh yeah.
But then like Pedrick and Dominic are talking, and Pedrick's talking about how he scared off that one gentleman, that musician who was jamming out with Colin, and he told him his father died, and Dominic looks at him and is like, that's terrible. Like,
like he didn't see the humor in it at all. He's just like, that's really mean.
Well, when he goes home and finds out his father's not dead, he's going to be super happy. He's like, I used to think you were nice, but now I don't know if you got mean or if you were just never nice to begin with. Again, that commentary on like how those conflicts we get into a situation where we start to do things that maybe we swore to ourselves we'd never do, or thought we'd never catch ourselves doing.
Yeah.
Part of that human nature, when we feel we've been wronged, or we feel that we're owed something, and then we start behaving in both destructive and self-destructive ways. And again, like the conflict and the war, and how we act in ways that are going to be damaging not only to our opponents or our perceived enemies, but also to ourselves, like the collateral damage to the people around us. And there's literal collateral damage. You talk about like modern warfare, and like you look at, you drop a bomb, right? Now there's drone strikes. You're getting civilian casualties around. And I think this was an allegory for, if you're going to launch any kind of war, there's going to be unintentional casualties, unintentional consequences. You're going to hurt other people. After you enter a conflict, there's some piece of yourself that is going to be lost, is going to be destroyed, that you can't 100% get back.
And I wanted to sort of go back to that initial point of, we don't want to call him the villain of this movie. He's not necessarily the villain. Like, Pedrick is like equally to blame here, where
he's pretty incorrigible. If he would have just laid off maybe for a couple of weeks, let Colin cool down, maybe that's all he needed, right? Like you were saying before.
Yeah, exactly. Like, especially after the first finger, when everything is serious, if he would just lay off, but he's just as stubborn as Colin is. Like, the two of them are kind of perfect for each other in that way. They're both very stubborn. They will not accept what they have here. And Pedrick really goes down that dark road. He does become mean and he does become like the villain of this movie in a way. Like he keeps bringing it forward. And the other side of it is that he's living with his sister, and his sister at one point asks him, it's just like, do you ever feel lonely? And he just looks at her like, what are you going on about? He's like, he can't deal with two people suffering like mental breakdowns. And he's just like, I can't remember his exact lines, but he's just like, he just dismisses it entirely. And I notice in that shot, he is trying to leave the house. She is framed in a mirror just over to his right-hand side. And the mirror has a crack that's bisecting her. Like she is torn between, like she has her own issues. Like she is lonely. She wants companionship. She can't find, like she's often derided for not being with a man. She can't find that. And she's kind of like, she's even further isolated from the community. Like she doesn't want everyone in on her business.
Well, she also, like, part of it too is like she wants to find her own career, which she ends up getting, right? It's like she has an job opportunity. It's not just about finding a man, Brian. Come on.
Yeah. And then later on, that same mirror, I mean, when she does leave the island for her career, and it's kind of telling as well that she's leaving the island to go to a war zone for a job, because that's more appealing than sticking around this community of isolationists. It was like, that's telling. And then
it's a heck of a commentary.
Patrick comes home, he finds Jenny dead, and he absolutely, like, he breaks. And he literally breaks the mirror that had bisected his sister earlier into 1,000 pieces. So now his reflection is completely shattered. It was like, there's no repairing that mirror now. Before, the mirror was usable with just one crack in it. A person is still, salvageable. Like, she can be rescued. I think that point there, the mirror breaking, he is beyond hope now. And he basically goes over to Colm, and he's just like, tomorrow at 2 p.m., because 2 p.m. is their meeting time, I'm going to burn down your house, regardless if you're in it or not. He's willing to commit murder. Like, he's willing to murder this guy. It's like, even at the very end of it, he brings the dog back because there's still a glimmer of niceness in him. But for him, he says, he's just like, we're taking this to our graves. Like, he's fully embraced that this is never going to happen. Meanwhile, you can't stop but think, in a couple weeks, Colm, he's not going to, like, he's done his music. He's done that, like you said, if you only give him a couple weeks or something to lay off of him. But he refuses to do that. And now it's created a permanent rift in their friendship. And this guy is unhinged. He's not going to accept it from anybody anymore.
Well, even at the end, Colm knows that he's coming to set fire to his house. He sends, after, in retaliation, essentially, for Jenny, like losing both his sister, Siobhan, who leaves to go to, I think, Ireland proper, to get a job, I think, at a library. And then Jenny dies on because what happened when Colm cut off his fingers, he went to Pedrick's and Siobhan's house and literally threw them at the door. You heard it was almost like a knocking at the door, like how hard he threw them. But I guess they weren't home at the time, and Jenny the donkey ended up choking on one of those fingers, dying as a result. Again, that allegory for collateral damage in warfare.
Without a doubt.
But then he tells him, I'm going to burn down your house tomorrow at 2, whether you're there or not. Please leave the dog outside. And so there's like almost a gentleman's agreement, but you see Colm, he's sitting inside the house as Pedrick sets the house on fire, and you think, oh, he's accepted that fate. But then you come back later and you see, oh, he had smashed open a window with a chair, and he's standing down by the ocean, have their final confrontation there, where Colm almost seems a little bit conciliatory, and he sees almost maybe a little guilty because he sees that his friend has changed. His friend used to be the nice one. Used to be, they called him, was it dull or dim or something, where he wasn't known for his intellectualism. I think at one point Dominic uses the expression touche, and Pedrick's like, what? To what? And he's like, oh, touche, it's French. So he was a really nice guy, and he sees this change in his friend from what's happened, but he also sees that the Pedrick he's past the point of no return, where he's not going to let this go anymore. But before, he was still trying to talk to Colm. He was still trying to, go back to the way things were. And you see that the circumstances, whether intentional or unintentional, that damage whether it was collateral or not. It crossed a line, and it was a line that Pedrick felt that he couldn't come back from. And so I don't know if there's going to be any more, to what degree the story's left open, whether they're going to be literally at each other's throats, or they're like the friendship's over and they're just not going to help each other anymore, or they're going to ignore each other. To what degree that is going to happen is left ambiguous. But I think that larger allegory, you look at, what do they call the Troubles in Ireland? Centuries later, that conflict, between Protestants and Catholics still going on up until, I think, was it the 80s? It kind of reached its fever pitch in terms of violence. But you see that divide still going, like, and that's a conflict in between like Ireland and England, really, that was going on for centuries. You see that, like, how it's embedded, and how there's again that metaphor for the Troubles in Ireland specifically, but the deeper conflicts of war and just people fighting with each other for no real good reason.
And then we have Mrs. McCormick, who is ever present throughout the entire film as kind of like, she's kind of like this, like she's an older lady who just wanders the island slowly, but she's always in the background of scenes. Like, she does interact with people. People try to avoid her. Like, she creeps them out. Pedrick especially, like, just hides behind a wall at one point to get away from her, but she's ever present. And she kind of becomes like the literal banshee of the island, because earlier Colm tells Pedrick, is like, what's the title of, like, tells him my song is called The Banshees of Inisherin. And Patrick's first thought is, there's no banshees here. Like, what? Like, why? How does that make sense, right? Like, he's very literal.
Yeah.
And then you have literally kind of like Mrs. McCormick filling that role where she's telling people, it's like, yeah, death is coming to this island. And that's just before Jenny the donkey dies.
Donkey.
And well,
it's not Shrek.
Right.
That's offensive to Irish people. You can't assume that that's Shrek is Scottish. Come on, Brian.
Scottish, yeah. And then Dominic, they find dead in the lake. And that's one of the big things. Did Dominic kill himself, or was it truly an accident? The film doesn't address it directly, but it may leave some hints. Like, what was your impression out of it?
I think it was pretty clearly suicide. I think that was the whole...
Yeah, I think it was ambiguous.
Well, I don't think it was ambiguous at all. I think they put those clues, like, A, he was being abused physically and sexually by his father. B, the one person that he looked up to, Pedrick, as a quote unquote nice person, but essentially a moral person, turned out to be not nice. So, like, the one person on the island that he thought he could look up to, he lost that hero. And then C, he made a pass at Siobhan. He asked her out. There was an age difference, and she let him down. Like, she was kind of mean to him the whole movie, but when she let him down and said, like, she let him down like super gently. She was super nice.
Oh yeah,
about the whole thing. But you could see in that moment, like, I think that was kind of the last straw. It's not obviously not her fault, but for him mentally, I think with all that was going on, when he says, "Oh, I have to go do something over there now," you realize later the thing he was talking about was killing himself, because there was no safe harbor for him. Siobhan and Pedrick were his only safe harbor from his father, who was abusing him, and she left the island, and Pedrick turned out to be not the nice person or the hero he envisioned. He had no more safe haven, and he killed himself. Another casualty of this war between Colm and Pedrick.
Without a doubt. Did you have anything else to add before we get into ratings of this film here?
There was another idea that I wanted to just briefly touch on. This idea, we talked about it before, where Pedrick was seen as, was it dim or dull? I think the word they used was dull. Essentially,
dull. They called Pedrick dim. Sorry, no, they called Pedrick dull.
Yes.
And everyone thought Dominic was like the dim one on the island, right?
Yeah.
And that's what made that scene where Dominic pulled out the word touche, like, so, like, that disturbed Patrick to the core because like, oh my God, the dim one is becoming smarter than me. Maybe I truly am dumb as well.
Well, I don't know if that was the issue, but I think that showed that, oh, Dominic wasn't the idiot that maybe people took him for. He was younger and he was kind of goofy, but he wasn't an idiot. He was just a victim of his circumstance.
Yeah, no, I mean, from Patrick's perspective, it was definitely like, I've underestimated himself.
Oh,
like, because he's questioning himself throughout this whole thing because people have told him he's dull and he's like, I'm not dull. Oh my God, maybe I am dull. Maybe I am dumb. Yeah. Like maybe all this stuff like that happened in the movie.
Oh, I didn't read that scene at all, but that's interesting. It's an interesting interpretation as well. Yeah, maybe it did push him over. I didn't think he was that prideful by that point, but it's entirely possible. But speaking of, the whole idea was with Colin, and he tells him, I think one of the things that Colin was frustrated with or upset with was because Pedrick did seem so content in this simple life, right? And it was almost like looking at him and seeing, like Colin was looking at Pedrick and seeing almost his own failures or his own inability to be satisfied. And he looked at this person, he looked at Pedrick and he saw, oh, he lives a simple life with a couple ponies and his donkey and his sister. And he doesn't want anything more than just to come here and hang out every day and drink beer and talk about whatever went on that day. And I think maybe there was something frightening about that for Colin, right? Maybe he saw Pedrick's contentment as a sort of complacency. Or he mistook contentment for complacency, where I think maybe it's a more modern concern, but maybe it's not a modern concern. Maybe it does go back, farther back than I think. About this idea of, putting that pressure on ourselves to, do something more important with our lives, or like keep pushing ourselves beyond, like to not be just content with what we have, to always keep wanting more. Maybe it ties into themes of, maybe not in this movie, but overall themes of like consumerism, right? Where we're constantly told like, no, you need to get more and more. You shouldn't be content with what you have. And maybe he sees this, he sees himself reflected in Pedrick. Here's this simple man living a simple life, and he's contented. And Colin can't find that same contentment, and he's looking for some way to essentially rationalize his legacy, or what he sees as, his important thing he needs to do, that he sees himself as maybe there's a kind of self-importance in there that's reflected in, I'm sure we've all felt that way, right? Where we look at somebody, like you grow up in a small town and some people are contented there and some people want to go, see the world. And maybe there's a tendency to look at people who are content with their lives as, as simple or dull. And I think this film roundly critiques that, right? Like if you're happy going to the pub every day, drink a pint of beer with your friends and talk about what went on in your day, there's no reason why, like there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a bad life. It's not bad to be content with simple pleasures in life. And I think there was an important commentary to be had in the film about that.
Yeah, there's some interesting imagery in Colin's house, especially on the rewatch of this movie. Like there's a lot of masks on the wall and like hanging from the ceiling. And it's like kind of alluding to his struggle with his own identity. And then there's even like at first I thought there was like he was in a puppets or something, like the marionettes, because there's things hanging from the ceiling.
Yes.
Until you see one that looks like it's literally a hanged man, like it's a puppet that's been hanged by its neck. You're like, oh, he has some thoughts of suicide going on as well. And especially when Pedrick is like, I'm gonna burn down your house, and we see the house is on fire and Colin is still sitting inside. Like he's at that point he's undecided if he wants to die or not, to pass on that legacy. Like what better way to go than that there. It's pretty brutal.
I think, several times whenever Colin goes to confession with the priest and the priest asked him, is the despair back? And at first he says, no, it's pretty good. And then later on in the movie, he's like, yeah, it's coming back a little bit.
So yeah, out of, we use the Letterboxd 5-star rating with a possible heart, which has got like a special like on top of that. Where do you stand on the Banshees of Inisherin?
Initially, I gave this a 4.5-star rating.
Yeah.
I might, after thinking about it more and going back and watching some of his earlier films, I might end up, this might be a 5-star film for me. Everything about it, the more I think about this movie, I love it more and more. In terms of the themes, I'm constantly, I started to go online and read other people's interpretations, and there's so much more going on than we didn't even have time to talk about today. The cinematography is beautiful. Like there's a shot there where like you see the entire, like the clouds and then the landscape below. There's shots of the actual, I don't know if this was actually shot in Ireland itself.
It was.
It was okay, yeah, but the landscapes were absolutely gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
The performances, like we mentioned, like everyone involved in it is one of those movies where even the background or kind of minor characters, everyone understood the assignment. Everyone came 100% ready. Again, Colin Farrell, I think for some reason people may have forgotten that this guy can act. Like there's a reason he's been in movies, in A-list movies, since, what was it, late 90s, I guess, early 2000s. When was Daredevil? When did Daredevil come out? That was around the time when he was really starting
2004
to make it. But go back and check out a little film called Phone Booth if you want to see like Colin Farrell's acting skills and only Colin Farrell's acting skills highlighted. Yeah. Obviously Brendan Gleeson, a treasure. Carrie Condon, who I finally realized I recognized her from Rome.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to place her the whole movie. Like, I know where she's from. She was one of the Julii clan or family in Rome. She was the daughter there.
The show that walked so that Game of Thrones could run.
Oh yeah, 100%. I didn't realize we were going into this discussion, but yeah, Rome. Totally. If you like Game of Thrones, go back and watch Rome instead. It's
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And then Barry Keoghan. Every time we see this guy, I think he was in the cut clip of he played the Joker in the Batman last year. The scene was cut, but then released online later on. It was bang up in that. He was great in. I wasn't a huge fan of the Eternals. It was pretty middle of the road, but he did a great job in that one as well. Everything I've seen this guy in. Yeah, he continues to knock it out of the park. I want to see like a movie led by Barry Keoghan soon.
And I just want to throw out that because Barry Keoghan was, cut out of the Batman, but Colin Farrell in the Batman as the Penguin.
Oh yeah, they're both in the Batman.
Under an ungodly amount of makeup, and I'm so happy that you get to see like Colin Farrell's full acting range and whatnot, like in these other films, especially this film, because it's like a crime to hide him behind that much like latex and whatnot, so you can't see his face and you can't see like his acting drop through, right?
Hey, what are you doing over here?
But yeah, for me, when I first saw this a few months ago, it was 4.5 easy. But I watched it again last night as like, there's no reason this isn't a 5-star film. Yeah. So I just bumped it up there. It was a 5-star. This is a contender for one of the top films of 2022 for me, but also for critics and audiences. I think Rotten Tomatoes has the critic rating at 97%, which seems really, really high. I think it deserves it. The Rotten Tomatoes audience rating of 76%. And I could see like an audience struggling a bit with some of that really dark humor, and kind of the ambiguous ending as well would kind of throw things off. Yeah. And obviously some of the events are like pretty gnarly throughout the film. IMDb has this movie at a 7.8, and Letterboxd has a average of 4.1 among its users.
It's pretty good.
So very highly rated. Martin McDonagh, I mean, this guy's movies are brilliant, and this is no difference. Like, this stuff is fantastic. There's a lot of care to put on screen into every single frame. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I can't wait for what's next from Martin McDonagh. I hope that he keeps using his muses. I know Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell were both the leads in In Bruges as well, reunited here. How many years later? What was that? 2008 or something?
2008 for In Bruges, yeah.
Over a decade later, and they still, that chemistry between them, still amazing. Yeah, it's, again, like you were saying, incredibly deep themes, but also very, very dark humor. The humor in this, like all of his movies, is very, very dark, very, very, very morbid. So if you're into that, it's right up your alley. If it's not your cup of tea, if you don't find the humor in somebody cutting off their fingers and throwing them at their best friend's door, maybe this movie isn't for you. But I'm counting down the days until I can pick this up on physical media.
Well, countdown no longer because it's already out on store shelves.
It's already out? No.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was just, really? Oh, man,
Go buy it at Walmart for $25 right now.
What, you Walmart shill? They got to you, didn't they, Brian?
It's the only place in town that seems to sell movies anymore.
But yeah, I might have to start a Martin McDonagh section in my physical media collection here.
Honestly, you might already be halfway there. Like, if you have Southern Psychopaths, 3 Billboards is an easy purchase because that movie was really good. And then In Bruges, 4 films, that's an easy victory. It's time to head out to the stores after this.
Done.